Welcome to Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, the Something to Talk About series. Today, we have a wonderful presentation from HB Harper, the City of Bainbridge Island Planning Manager, who is going to talk to us about the comprehensive plan and the EIS, and we'll give you tons and tons of detail about that. Before we get to that, I'd like to give you our announcement of our sponsor. Something to Talk About is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers assisted and independent living along with a vibrant memory care community located on their Rolling Bay campus. They also include day stay and respite care programs. For a tour and a free lunch, call 206-594-1010 and ask for Celia or Jamie, or just check out their website at fieldstonecommunities.com. And if you haven't been out there, it really is a pretty incredible place. It's beautiful. And also, we like to do a land acknowledgement. Let me get to this. We would also like to acknowledge that we meet on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water. The Suquamish have lived on the water of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters. So with that, Harper, I know you have a terrific presentation for us. If you'd tell us a little bit about yourself and then tell us what to expect, and I'll let you take over.
Sure. Thanks so much. Well, really exciting to be here. Happy to be joining the podcast. I've been with the city for about 2 years, and I oversee both current and long-range planning functions here at the city. So that means the folks who do all of the permitting, land use, and environmental sort of code analysis for every development project that ever gets built, and also the long-range planning. And so today I'm here to talk about some major long-range planning efforts that are going on in the city right now, and to hopefully encourage everybody to make public comment, to come to some events, and to get engaged and involved, and answer any questions if I can. So I do have some slides here. Should I go ahead and share them now?
Yeah, that'd be great, Harper. We tested them out. They should be super. Let's see what you got.
Okay, let's see how it works.
Bingo.
Good. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you about the comprehensive plan and Winslow-Severity plans. It's 2 different plans that are being updated. And then, just to make it more interesting, a third document, which is the draft environmental impact statement, which is the big honking document that we're asking people to get engaged in right now for the public comment period. So the environmental impact statement is a tool that we're using in the process to update these 2 plans, the comprehensive plan and the Winslow-Severity plan. So I thought I could start with some sort of basics to make sure that everybody's on the same page and has a good grounding in kind of what we're talking about here, because some folks are very involved in city happenings and might know all about the comprehensive plan already, and others might be wondering how it's relevant to them and what it means, because it's not necessarily a part of most people's everyday life. So let's see, can I change the slides? I can. So what is a comprehensive plan? Comprehensive plans are 20-year plans that articulate a community vision. They do this mostly by having goals and policies and, sort of programs and actions and all the kinds of things that all good plans have. But they're really important because they guide the day-to-day decisions of elected officials and local government staff. So they always include robust community input. They don't always include an environmental impact statement. So this is a really unique update to the comprehensive plan, because we have this major different way that we're going about it, based on having to grow and having to change, like many communities in the state. Comprehensive plan updates have been more minor the past couple rounds, so that we do them every 10 years now. It used to be 8 years. And at this point in kind of the Growth Management Act, if you're familiar, it's passed in the 90s. Here we are, how many decades later? It doesn't feel like that long ago to many of us, but a lot of communities are in the same place that Bainbridge is, of needing to really take a hard look at our zoning standards specifically, and I'll get more into that, of course. But so let's talk about what's in a comprehensive plan before I go way in the weeds with you all. So comprehensive plans have a variety of elements. They start with land use, and the land use element is really about accommodating growth. So I can talk a little bit more about the other elements, but first let's just talk about sort of the basis of a comprehensive plan. So the state gives us population projections that go to the regions and to the counties and then to the cities within the counties to say, hey, more people are projected to be here. What's your plan for making sure that they're accommodated both in terms of, somewhere to live and public services and transportation? And, will you have enough services to support population growth? So while comprehensive plans are very broad and can touch on lots of different things, at their core, they're somewhat focused on land use and on housing. I'm sorry, land use and on transportation. So housing has come into the picture more recently, but land use and transportation are really kind of where a lot of the growth management requirements started. So comprehensive plans look at your land use, they look at your transportation and say, are you going to have enough, zoning capacity? Are you going to have enough transportation, services, whether it's, money to repair the potholes or it's capital dollars to build a new road, to support the people who are going to, who are projected to come to your community. So that's one big component of the comprehensive plan, but they also look at all the other capital facilities. So not just transportation, but also sewer, water, fire, police, schools, really looking across agencies at all the services people rely on that we all rely on in our day-to-day lives. So the comprehensive plans look at utilities, transportation, climate change and resiliency. Our City of Bainbridge Island comprehensive plan also has an economic element, an environmental element, cultural, human services, water resources. It's really a sort of laundry list of the things that are most important to us and what kinds of goals and policies we want to have on the books to make our community what we want to be over the 20-year time period. So it's important. It's a really important document because it guides city investments in infrastructure. So if you care about kind of what the world looks like out there and how you're getting around, there are probably decisions that were made based on the comprehensive plan, and you'll want to get involved and understand those. So it also establishes regulations for meeting the community vision. So not just what the city's doing in terms of spending money on capital facilities, but also regulations for how private landowners can help meet the community vision via the development, that can happen on private property. So that's a little bit about the comp plan, but why are we updating it now? Well, accommodating this population growth that's shown on the slide over the 20-year time horizon requires us to, sort of scrutinize the existing adopted comprehensive plan and say, is this enough? Is it going to be enough to support further growth since the last time we updated? And we also want to take this opportunity to integrate a lot of recent policy work that the city council and the community have done, because this jurisdiction has done some incredible planning work over the last few years in terms of the sustainable transportation plan, the climate action plan. It's almost finished, I think, the groundwater management plan. So there are some really important efforts being put in to, specific topic areas that need to be integrated into one guiding policy document that takes all of those pieces of the puzzle and says, okay, here's how we're going to grow in 20 years. Here's how we're going to serve the population with, services and utilities and all the things that people need. So that's why we update. Now,
before you move on, Harper,
yeah.
before you move on, somebody asked, what is UUGA? What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. Right. So that's it has to do with the urban growth area. So all of the areas in Kitsap County have their city boundaries, and then they also have unincorporated urban growth areas around them, but we don't. So you notice there's no UGA after Bainbridge Island. So we've got a very definite border, and it means that we don't have a lot of conversations about annexation or urban densities. A lot of the other cities and counties, a lot of the other cities within the county have to consider areas of the county that could be annexed and could become part of the city. So yeah, we
Okay.
try to remove acronyms whenever we can. I'm sorry that one is still on there. I think we didn't create the original graphics, so I didn't have an easy time editing it. But Bainbridge Island, it's a non-issue because we're entirely an incorporated city. So the entirety of Bainbridge Island is an incorporated urban growth area, incorporated city where urban growth is expected. And that means we have to be able to show in our comprehensive plan that we have the infrastructure to support that growth. So any other questions before I move on? I know that was a lot of just sort of some real basics, but it's all something I've been thinking about for way too long. So I don't want to assume that it's coming easily to anybody else.
I think we're fine.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about what we're doing in this process. So I mentioned that we're updating these plans. What we're doing is evaluating how we might update them. So we start with a scoping process. That's where we have public meetings and a public comment period where we say, hey, what should we look at? We have to update these plans. We have to integrate certain state mandates. We have to integrate recent planning efforts. What do you think, community? What do we want to make sure is on the table? What do you want to make sure is off the table? You know, and that kind of casts our net to make sure that we have the right scope for the work. So that took place last year. And now what we have is a draft environmental impact statement. And I'll talk more about kind of what's in it in the coming slides, but the draft environmental impact statement is it's a tool for identifying and analyzing probable adverse environmental impact. So, you know, how are things going to be affected? Alternatives to doing different actions that we might do, possible mitigation for ways to protect the environment. And it's important to note that the environment here includes a lot of different items. And I'll get to those on the next slide, but I wanted to make sure it was understood where we were in the process because the city has not decided anything yet. And so that means that this is a really key time to get involved. So where we go from here is into the creation of a preferred alternative. So the alternatives that are studied don't have to be just chosen one or the other. They can have bits and pieces from each that come together to form a preferred alternative. So there will be public meetings, you know, probably with the city council, with the planning commission, to get to a preferred alternative. And then we have a final environmental impact statement, and that is used to really, you know, give the decision makers that full information that they need to be able to, you know, respond to all the comments that were received, to take those into account and use that information in decision making. So, you know, eventually, a little while after that, you have actually your adopted documents. So you have your updated comprehensive plan and Winslow Severia plan. So it's a long process. It's already felt long, and it's, you know, it's not going to end tomorrow. But what that means is there are a lot of opportunities to get involved now and again over, you know, a next little while. I won't give an exact date range. So let's talk about what the environmental impact statement looks at. So it has three alternatives, and they include a no action alternative, which can't actually be chosen, but it's included as a baseline. And it studies those alternatives over all these different things on the right. So it studies them against land use, housing, population, employment, aesthetics, environmental justice, air quality, utilities, natural environment, public services, and transportation. And those are just the chapters of the document. So it can feel, if you're trying to read it, it can feel a little bit repetitive because it really goes through each of these elements and says, okay, if we do nothing different than we do today under the no action alternative, what are the impacts on land use, on housing, on population, on employment? And so, and you can tell those are not just strictly what most people might think of as environmental, right? They're all the things about the world that might matter to people. I mean, maybe it's not, it doesn't cover every single thing, but it's really broad. And so that means that we're taking a really high level look at how Bainbridge Island might change if we don't change any of our policies or regulations. You know, there are still changes still going to happen because some amount of change always happens in one direction or another, right? Nothing is static. So that is the laundry list of what's in this big document. That's why it's so big. But then for each of those, it's about identifying those impacts and what options we have to address those impacts. So let's talk about what the alternatives actually are, because that's where, the details become more real. So first of all, I want to bring up our current land use framework strategy. And so this is how the city, up until now, has considered accommodating growth. And what we heard during scoping is that folks like this. So folks want to continue this strategy. So it's adopted now. We expect it to continue in the future. And that is to direct growth to centers. So if you look at the graph on the left, centers, designated centers on our land use plan make up a little under 9% of the land area. So that's obviously Winslow. It's also our Rolling Bay Island Center and Linwood Center. Those are what we call our neighborhood centers. And then for employment more so than housing, we have our Day Road and Sportsman Triangle industrial centers. So out of the centers, the Winslow Town Center is the majority of that. And that I think is intuitive to people. Winslow is kind of where the most, the most there is, as we like to say, the most stuff is happening. So folks want to continue that strategy. That means that we're going to look to those centers and evaluate them for what can and should change to accommodate, these recent planning efforts, these recent policy efforts, state, required mandates, growth projections, all of that. So we're really focused on the centers. And I think that's important because there's a whole rest of the island that also matters. But the EIS is focused on those centers because it was so clear during the scoping process that folks really like and still commit to this growth strategy of directing growth to centers. So the alternatives, I described alternative one, no action. It's not consistent with the mandates we've been given. We're not able to accommodate the growth that we need to if we don't take any action. So it's included as kind of a, what do they call it? Like a control, right? Or a baseline, but it's not something that can be selected. So we have two, what we call action alternatives. So if one is no action, then the other two and three, are the action alternatives. And we call them colloquially, go up and go out. But that's maybe, a little too colloquial because actually the go out also goes up a little bit and, there's lots of details to it. But essentially alternative two looks at increasing the density within existing centers, building a little taller, doing a little more infill, and specifically a lot more multifamily, larger multifamily in the Winslow area. And that's multifamily buildings, right? So that could be townhouses or apartment buildings or condo buildings, that kind of thing. And then alternative three looks at increasing the density, but a little bit less so than alternative two. So not going quite as tall. And it looks at expanding the center's boundaries a little bit. So not a lot, but a little bit to kind of capture perhaps a little bit more land. And then really focus more on middle housing. So middle housing is that kind of housing that it's not a detached single family home that's, on its own lot all by itself, but it's not an apartment building. It's somewhere in between there. Middle housing has really been identified as a type of housing that is missing, or multiple types of housing that are missing from many communities in the country and in the state. And indeed, it is true for us here on Bainbridge Island, right? You do see a lot of detached single family homes, those sort of bigger homes on their own lots. We don't see as many duplexes, triplexes, sort of smaller, 6-unit kind of things. And so that is the focus of alternative three, is more of that middle housing. So we call that the go out alternative. But like I say, it also goes up a little bit. So I do want to be clear about that with folks. So
Before you move on,
yeah.
HB, before you move on, just since you're describing housing, someone has asked about where does low income housing fit in there? Is that a policy, or is that a land situation, or is it both?
Great question. So something that is new this time of updating the comprehensive plan. So previously we only had to accommodate a number of people, and they could be assumed to all be of any income. But now we have new housing specific targets that say you must plan for and accommodate housing that's affordable to the full income spectrum, including this many units to the low income, this many units to the moderate income, And it's, it's all very laid out with numeric mandates that we have to show that we can accommodate. So low-income housing is a big focus. Affordable housing is a big focus of this comprehensive plan update and the Winslow-Sidbury plan update. So let me
So
talk about that for another minute, but yeah, go ahead.
it's blended into 2 and 3 then.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
actually, it's blended in all of these, right? It's already in
Right.
there.
Right. So the mandate says, you can't just assume that everyone will live in a big detached single family house on a big lot. That's not going to work for a lot of people. We know that Washingtonians in general are struggling with housing affordability, right? So this is the state legislature who's identifying this issue, and their solution is to say, in your comprehensive plan update, cities, counties, you need to show that you can accommodate an actual number of housing units that will be affordable to the extremely low, moderate, high. So those mandates that's one reason alternative one cannot be chosen, is that we cannot meet those mandates with no action.
All right, thank you. You can move
Yeah.
on. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, so let's continue. So what's coming up? We've got some really exciting events. I mean, maybe I shouldn't oversell them. I think they're going to be really good events. You got to be into the content, definitely. They're not, they're not National Night Out. I heard that was a really wonderful event. I wasn't able to go, but they are, I think, very open and inclusive in terms of people's participation. So we really want robust public engagement. We want a wide swath of folks to show up. We want as many people as possible to come. So I really, really want to encourage everyone, if you're remotely interested, to please show up. But first, we have what we're calling the neighborhood center open houses. So these are more pop-up events. They're focused on those non-Winslow centers. So there's one in Island Center, one in Rolling Bay, one in Linwood Center, and one in Day Road. And they're drop-in open house style. So, we'll have boards set up. There will be staff and consultants there to kind of answer questions about it. There will be exercises, maps to draw on, and we want to receive public comment there, but also have, dialogue. So it's not just, please put your comment in the box. It's like, how can we as a community who cares about this specific area, really come together around what we want to see in a preferred alternative. So those are coming up. Those are some weekend dates were chosen so that folks who, have day jobs are able to attend. But I think all of that content can also, be available online as well. So then the big event is the September 18th open house. So that's not specific to those individual centers. That's a big all island kind of event. That's a broad review of all the alternatives. It's at the high school. It's in the cafeteria. It's open house style. We'll have a presentation, but we'll also be looking again for that feedback on the alternatives and what should be in the preferred alternative, and getting input on that. So there will be a court reporter there. So if you're not inclined to put your comments in writing yourself, if you'd rather say them verbally, you can come to that event and do that. You can also submit comments if they are written before or after that event. So it's not that you can only comment if you come to that event. You can email us anytime. You can come to City Hall anytime. You can go to the comment portal online anytime, and I can show you how to get there. You can mail them, you can send them on a carrier pigeon. No, just kidding. So we do encourage folks to submit comment in whatever way works best for you. We've tried to be as open as we can and make it as easy as possible. And to that end, we've also introduced childcare services for the first time, I think, for the city. We'll have childcare available with advanced sign up just across the street at First Year. So that's a really great way to hopefully get some folks who might otherwise have a hard time showing up. So, and then again, we'll have an online version of this open house that's available if folks are not able to make it. So the public comment period runs all the way through October 10th. So that's plenty of time if you want to come to the event and ask questions and have a dialogue and go back and talk to your community, your family, your friends. That's also possible. You don't have to feel like you have to have something prepared, to show up at these events. So I hope it feels really inviting and welcoming, because it really is. And so far, so we've been doing what we call road shows. So this is an example of the road show, which is like getting out there and talking to people about it, encouraging people to come. We've been at the farmers market. We've met with a couple groups. So far, it's been really, really positive. Not because people don't have, strong opinions or really, have things they think the city should be doing or want the city to be doing, but because there is an opportunity here to make a difference. And I think, as a local government worker, I don't know that I can always say that. Sometimes, decisions have already been made and it's a little too late for comment. And that happens a lot with permitting. If somebody sees a building going up that they don't like, that isn't what they expected. We have public comment periods, but sometimes at that point, the building has already been sort of determined to meet regulations. And so I think it can feel like it's not really public comment if I say I don't want it and then it still happens. And, that's one of the really good reasons to get involved in long range planning, because how it all trickles out to individual decisions that get made, there's a lot of operational and administrative details to that are hard for folks to get really involved in. But this stuff, how should my community look and feel, and why should I care about what it's going to be like in 20 years? That's, where you can really talk about what's important to you. So I think for a lot of folks, housing is important. Mobility is important. Can I get around? Can I get where I need to go? Are there, the kinds of things here on the island that I need to thrive? So we definitely hear about healthcare. And when we talk to healthcare folks, we hear that it's difficult to retain employees because of housing affordability. So, there are linkages between these issues that really speak to why the city needs to take a hard look at the ways that it guides development and regulates and invests in services and invests in capital facilities. So that's kind of the pitch for why I really want folks to be involved now, because, you might not be able to get a grocery store exactly where you want it, and then you're like, I would really love one next door to me. Actually, I live really close to the Safeway, so I'm fine for now. But I think that's a common thing that we hear from folks is like, why can't there be a X right on my corner? You might not be able to control that level of decision making, but you might be able to say, hey, at a broad level, are we doing everything we can to make it possible for people to have a good life here? And if we continue to have a situation where, for instance, local workers are not able to afford to be here, so they're commuting from off island, is that meeting, our climate goals related to vehicle miles traveled? Probably not, right? So what can we do to accommodate those folks on island? That gets to housing type, housing affordability, mobility and access, all that good stuff. So what do you think? Have I covered a lot of the things that you were thinking I would, or what can I answer?
Well, I will ask a question that was in the chat. It's a bit of a step back, but talking about the three alternatives that you provided, when we can't do one, but 2 and 3 are considered. This is from Dave. He says alternative 2 expands the ferry district, but alternative 2 on the chart seems like that is not going to be proposed. So, and I can unmute Dave if he wants to opine on that a little bit more. Does that question make sense to you?
It does, yeah. So we look at the boundary of the center overall. So while the specific zonings may expand or contract, the overall sub-area boundary is not proposed to change under alternative 2, but the zoning within that is proposed to change and may, as you say, include the ferry terminal zone getting bigger. And specifically right now we have 5. That's the kind of thing I should have off the top of my head. We have a handful of zoning districts within Winslow, and that really should be a lower amount. It's not helpful to have lots and lots and lots of different zoning districts with slightly different regulations. It's really difficult to administer codes like that. So going down to just having ferry terminal, core, high school road, and transitional, which is kind of the general way that some of all the different overlay districts have been revamped. That's kind of the direction that we're going, regardless of alternatives, simply to, be able to have a cogent conversation where you don't have 6 different zoning districts that you're trying to keep track of. So those more dense zones are moving, those boundaries are changing and maybe getting bigger because they're absorbing several other types of zoning districts, but the Winslow sub area boundary is not changing under alternative 2. Does that answer the question?
No.
Well, it
Yeah,
answers that question, but I have a whole bunch more, but go ahead and keep going.
I've got, why don't you go clear next?
So HB, do you have more of your presentation you'd like to give us, or are we opening this up to questions?
Well, I think
Let's-
just
let's-
another, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Keep
I was
going
gonna
with
say
your
just-
presentation.
Yeah, this is basically the end is the sort of how to participate. You can review the DEIS, the document itself online. There are also hard copies. There's one at the senior center. There's one here at City Hall. There's one at the library. Attend, comment. And so after the comment period closes, the city team and the consultants will be responding to every single comment within, a document, not individually. So that the final environmental impact statement contains the full record of all the comments received and how, they're responded to or addressed. So then the city council will use that to give guidance to the planning commission, presumably on developing a preferred alternative. So the planning commission would, do that work to kind of flesh out the preferred alternative based on policy guidance from city council. And then all of that goes into that final environmental impact statement. So I wanted to make sure that people understood sort of where it was going. And yeah, that's the end of my slides.
Okay, now before we go on, what I'd prefer to do, I'll have Dave take the floor again, but if there are additional questions, I'd like people to use the reaction button so that you can put your hand up, and I'll give you in line of, if as I see it, I'll say who's next. But it would probably be helpful, HB, for me anyway, if you could close out your slides so that I can see every square, and then I'll know if hands go up. That's better. And with that in mind, Dave, you maybe would react to the response to your comment, and you said you had another question. So go ahead, Dave.
Well, I understand now what the idea of zoning within the sub area change, but I have a number of questions based on the capacity that's required of the sub area of Winslow and the island itself. And I noticed that excess capacity is built into each one of the of alternative 2 and 3. And why I'm trying to understand why that is and whether that's allowed or not at all. In other words, if you're trying to apportion your growth in a particular area, you do that, and then you see what kind of capacity you come up with. The actual capacity that appears to be available in the Winslow sub area exceeds the need by a considerable amount, as far as I can tell. And why would that be? I've heard of in the comp plan excess capacity being discussed before, but I'm trying to figure out why you're allowed to do that, for example.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one of the key things that we're hearing so far. So I'm glad you asked it, because it's a great thing to address and to get as many folks as possible understand kind of the different mandates that are at play here. So this is going to go a little deep in the weeds, but bear with me. The state historically has always given us a population mandate. So that's a number of people that we have to accommodate. But for the first time, the state has also given us and everyone a housing unit target. So that's another mandate. And you might think, well, aren't those the same? They're not the same, and they only overlap a little bit. So what that means is, whereas before, then the state would say, okay, you've got, 20 people marching across the Agate Pass Bridge looking for a home. Do you have housing for 20 people? And we could say, oh yeah, there are 20 acres available for 1 acre homes. No problem. Now, the state says, okay, you've got 20 people marching across that bridge, but also you've got a housing affordability problem. And so you need to show us that you can accommodate 4 low-income apartments, 4 medium-income apartments, 5 accessory dwelling units, and I've lost my math. Where was I at? 7 of something else, right? So they're telling us very specifically that we have to accommodate housing that's affordable to different segments of the population via our zoning and development standards. And we cannot assume that all 20 of the people marching across the Agate Pass Bridge or taking the ferry from Seattle are going to live in the affordable apartments, the, you know, mid-rise affordable apartments, the ADUs, the whatever, like they don't overlap 100%. So what that means is because 90-ish% of the island is zoned for single family housing, that detached home on its own lot that's not expected to be affordable, that's not projected to be affordable, they're not affordable today to new buyers, right? We have to zone in addition to that. So if we didn't have the housing targets, we could probably meet most of our capacity by allowing all of the people who we've been, you know, given in the population target, just saying, yeah, they'll all live out in the conservation area, as we call it, the area that's zoned for low density housing. But now with the housing targets, we have to show that we have specific capacity for multifamily housing. So that's apartments, you know, cottages, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, condos, townhouses, all the kind of stuff that might happen a little bit already, right? We have some in town, but there's not the level of capacity that we need to accommodate the housing targets anywhere on the island. So that's why we have to upzone Winslow. But we're not taking away any of those single family homes that are available or, you know, that capacity could accommodate elsewhere on the island. So I'm gesturing as if you can like see out my window towards the parts of the island that are lower density. So all those homes can still get built. But in addition to that, we need to show that multifamily housing can also get built. So that's why you have an excess, because the population target is no longer what we shoot for. They still give it to us and we have to say, yes, that many people can be accommodated, but it becomes not a limiting factor anymore. And almost every jurisdiction I've talked to is in the same boat. And we all have talked to Commerce about it because the Department of Commerce of the state is who's sort of issuing the guidance on this. And we're saying, you realize that with these housing targets, we're going to exceed our population target.
Yeah.
And they've said, yes, we do understand that. Yes, that sounds tricky. And they leave it to us to figure out what it means. So we're all in the same boat. And, you know, I think when you've asked sort of whether it's allowed, I think at the moment, it's the only thing that has been put forward as being meeting the mandate. So they have not said that there's any other way to meet the housing mandates except to go through these steps to demonstrate that multifamily zoning capacity for the purposes of affordable housing.
Okay,
But what is the
question on
let me
that?
follow. Dave, let me ask you as a host here on that question. What's the exposure to Bainbridge if you don't follow the mandate? If you just say we're not going to do it?
Right, great question. So if we do not meet the requirements, we will not be certified. So our comprehensive plan would not be certified by PSRC, and it would not be certified by the Department of Commerce, and we would lose our eligibility for state funding. And so that could be for everything from a transportation project to a culvert replacement to, you know, human services funding. I'm not exactly sure all of the different ways that jurisdiction accesses state funding, but we would be ineligible for state funding. That's the main, you know, kind of stick that the state has for, you know, getting cities and counties to kind of do this work the way that they believe it should be done.
Okay, Dave,
Okay,
go ahead. If you had
follow up again. I don't mean to take over here, but how about what do you estimate the capacity? Well, the new state law, I assume, is going to apply to Bainbridge, and it talks in terms of no single family zoning, or where there is single family zoning, you can't preclude fourplexes, triplexes, duplexes, and ADUs. If that's correct, and if it applies to the Winslow sub-area, have you calculated the impact of that law on capacity, wholly aside from any rezoning or height, making the number of stories available for development higher? I think you can see what I'm getting at. When you take a look at the state law, it almost looks like it could double or triple the capacity existing in the Winslow sub-area now.
Right, great question again. And I can see that you're in the weeds on this too. So I'm going to meet you where you're at. I believe you're talking about House Bill 1110 that was originally passed. And then there was an update to it that I think was numbered 2320. It does not apply to the city of Bainbridge Island. So it does not apply to, I think it's islands in the Puget Sound, that are designated a sole source aquifer. So because of our status as a sole source aquifer island, that bill does not apply to us. So we are not going forward with what a lot of other jurisdictions are to make it permissible for people to build more than one unit on their single family zoned lot. Now, of course, you can you can build an accessory dwelling unit, but aside from that, we're not subject to that law.
Okay, so there was no, at one point, there was a 30,000 population necessity to apply it to cities, wasn't there? Anything under 30,000 didn't have to abide by the new state law, but you're saying with respect to islands now, it doesn't apply. Okay, that's
Sole
interesting.
source aquifer islands of the Puget Sound are exempt from House Bill 1110.
Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
then
but let me jump, Dave. We'll go back and forth rather than having you be the
Yeah.
only one to ask a question. Since you mentioned aquifers, I mean, a lot of my friends on the island, I've been here for 46 years, say, what about water? It's gonna ruin everything. I mean, people are really frightened about water, and we've had a number of studies done over the 46 years I've been here, and they keep saying, well, there's enough. But aren't all of your planning decisions based upon the ability to supply utilities to wherever they're trying to build, so that's really it? That's a shadow that's over everything, isn't it?
Well, another great question. You guys are lasering in on the things that we hear a lot about. So I'm glad that you haven't come out with anything out of left field that I haven't been prepared for. You never know. So groundwater is evaluated in the environmental impact statement. And in addition, the groundwater management plan that's going on now, it's actually being completed by the same folks. It's a different team, but the same, I think they're called environmental engineering, EA. I only know the acronym. I can't remember. Environmental engineers, I guess. Wait, environmental associates? Wow, I can't believe I don't know what that is. That's terrible. We should cut this out of the podcast. EA is the one who performed both the draft environmental impact statement work, and they got info from a different team within their organization on the groundwater management plan, because that plan is not adopted by the city council yet, but a lot of the modeling, I believe, was done before the EIS was published. So they had great information, and they were able to say, any impacts are mitigatable. So, I think the groundwater management plan, when it comes out, will tell us, maybe more specifically, I don't know if it's numeric exactly, but, sort of management tools that are available to address impacts that may happen in some time frame. But essentially, the environmental impact statement does take a hard look at that, and it is not shown to be a limiting factor.
All right. So, more questions, Dave? Anybody?
Yes, how about sewer capacity?
Yeah, sewer capacity is also evaluated in quite a bit of depth. So, it's not that there's no problem there, it's that the problems are solvable. So the problems that are identified are related to the capacity of the existing plant, pump stations, and, sewer pipes and all that. And the answer is, you're going to have to upgrade some. And so part of the big core purpose of this exercise that I think can get a little dry for people, but it really matters, is capital facilities planning. So it says, okay, if you want to, go with this scheme or versus that scheme in terms of accommodating growth, you're going to need to upgrade this, that, and the other capital facilities, including your wastewater treatment center or your sewage treatment plant or your pump station. What's that going to cost? What's your plan for being able to do that? Because you can't just say, well, we'll upgrade it. You do have to identify a year funding that's going, likely to be available, funding sources, what those have been. And so there are some very laboriously difficult to read chapters in many comp plans around the state for the capital facilities, because it's tables and tables and tables that are essentially these project lists of projects and dollar amounts and years and funding sources to say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. It's a lot of work. So in the EIS, it just says, upgrade a pump station and you'll be okay, or, whatever the exact details are of what needs to be upgraded. Obviously, that's just the beginning, because then our public works department, our city council, everybody has to work really hard to actually, figure out the details of how that's going to happen. But essentially, yes, there are limiting factors to our capacity right now, but that doesn't mean that we can't make changes and upgrades and have projects that address that issue. And the document really goes into what those are specifically and how they can be, enough to mitigate the impact of accommodating growth.
If you had, for example, to increase your sewer capacity, since the Winslow sub-area is served by sewer, do you have to do that prior to the effect of a rezone? In other words, could you rezone ahead of that when the city promises, well, we're going to upgrade our sewer system, but it would seem more logical that they would have to actually do it before you could rezone for more capacity.
Yeah, well, there's a, concept under the law of concurrency. So the idea is that, as growth happens, you're upgrading. Now, I think the reality is that growth is very incremental, right? It's a 20-year time horizon. And, we're not expecting that on the day that everything's passed, that all the growth springs up. And so, that's sort of looked at as, okay, over the 20 years, when are we going to need that capacity at the wastewater treatment plant? And so then when do we need to back out our sort of funding and our date, that we're planning to implement that improvement? So, I think it's not necessarily that there's a date that we know exactly how much growth, if we're going to exceed a target, but there are standards that my public works folks would be able to rattle off to you. I'm going to approximate them and say, when you're at 85% capacity, you have to have the plan to go, beyond 100%, because that's close enough to 100 that the Department of Ecology says, hey, make sure you have a plan for as this gets higher. So I think that's going to play into it. But we don't exactly know the pace of growth. We can look at the historical information and say, well, we've grown by, 200-300 units a year or something. So if we change things, that might increase, but again, it's not going to be 800 units in one year and then none in the next. In all likelihood, it's going to be sort of spread out. And so then the capital facilities planning does the work to say, okay, at what point are we going to have a problem? Let's back out and make sure that we've installed, the improvements that we need so that we don't run into situations where we've exceeded our capacity and have to, put a halt to things.
Okay,
Is
I
that
don't
part
want
of
the
the-
only one asking questions, so, but I have some more.
Let me do it, David. I have a question, follow up on that. If in fact, isn't that part of the permitting process though? Even if it's zoned to put in a 20-unit apartment, if you don't have the water to use it or don't have the sewage to take care of it, they're not going to give you the permit. Isn't that the way it
Absolutely.
works?
Absolutely. You need water and sewer availability. Yep.
Can I ask a question about what the kinds of comments you're going to get? What will be helpful to the council and to the planners? In what I understood it is you're going to be doing a kind of building block thing where one alternative, you're going to take out something and add another thing, and it may be some amalgam. So what kinds of comments are you looking for that will be helpful to making the decisions that one is going to make in the end for a preferred
I
alternative?
love that question. That's how can we help you? That's such a great question. Yeah, so there are two purposes of the public comment period. One is, did we miss anything in this document? So it's a pretty long document. I'm not saying we didn't miss anything, but that's not necessarily the most exciting part of this, right? That's kind of like, did we get anything wrong? The second part is to inform that preferred alternative. So in terms of how you can help, make a comment that really gets to that, I would say, you could choose to go way in depth on alternatives 2 and 3 and tell us exactly which pieces of the puzzle that you like and don't like and why and all that. You could also be a little higher level and say, a preferred alternative needs to accomplish this, this, and that for it to be a success. Because those higher level policy objectives, are really where the council is going to start dialing in on the details. So it might be that at that particular property, you really think that this height is what should be allowed and not that height. That can be a part of it too. But imagine if you're the council receiving all these different comments like that, that's a lot harder to kind of sift through to figure out like, what's the overall point here? So I think that to the extent that folks want to focus on the key objectives, like if the most important thing to you is, waiting on that sewer capacity until the money is for sure in place. I'm just using the last thing that was said as an example, that it can be about that. It can be about what's important to you. And that doesn't mean that that's, going to be the easiest thing to accomplish, but if there's enough momentum and support for similar objectives, that will really help the city council have a clear, guiding light for, okay, the public wants this. Let's form a preferred alternative that accomplishes this. So that is my advice. And it's not because I don't want folks to weigh all the way in and, get into the details and be scrutinizing chapters 3.1 through 3.9. And I mean, they're very detailed stuff. So you absolutely should do it if you have the time, energy, and interest. But if you don't, I would focus on what's important to you and kind of articulate that and say, whatever actions you take, make sure they do this.
So I have another question about housing units. The requirement you have for Kitsap is 1,977 units, new housing units over the 20-year period. And when you subtract the number that are not affordable, you come up with 1,417 housing units. If the city were to say, we are going to accomplish this via these projects, XYZ, like the city's police station being renovated, like the senior center, potential for 100 units. I'm expand, but you could figure out a way to very specifically do that over the next 20 years. Do you then have to rezone everything?
No, we have not identified enough specific projects to cover that number. So we have the city has a couple different tools, right? Building on land that the city owns is a great one.
Right.
We don't own enough land for that to be the only tool we need to use. So there are other tools such as inclusionary zoning, where the market produces some affordable units. And that's where the density comes in, because the market, private developers won't do that because of financial reasons, unless there's sort of a certain amount of density that makes the whole project sort of pencil for them. So that's where the height and the increases in density come. So if we had lots and lots of city land and we were committed to building it ourselves, we could absolutely meet the target that way. But as it is, the city has pretty limited land that it's holding. And that's, again, very common for other jurisdictions in our area. So we're not alone in that. So it's a really like all the tools in the toolbox coming to bear on the issue and saying, okay, we're going to do a little this, a little that, a little this. And I mean, we're going to maximize what we can do with each of those. But, as you might imagine, the housing affordability issue, if you're familiar with the Housing Action Plan, it's a pretty deep problem, right? It's not something where 1 or 2 units is going to make enough of a difference. It really does have to be at scale to accomplish the goals that the city council sort of identified through that Housing Action Plan work and the former Affordable Housing Task Force and, all these different efforts over the years. And not to mention, of course, the state mandates. So I think that all the tools are going to be, part of the picture as we move forward.
Could the city
wait.
actually do a list, and you're saying that would meet the goal, what you required? You wouldn't have to do the zoning if you had all the projects in place.
If the city had enough land, right, but the city doesn't have enough land.
All right, let me jump into a different area here from the chat. We have something from Christy Heath. And these EIS takes into account a lot of different things. Christy's asking, how does healthcare availability factor in? Is that one of the factors similar to transportation or anything else? How do you do that?
Yeah, great point that we do hear a lot. Healthcare availability is something where the tools available to local government are somewhat more limited, right? So we can zone for something that would be favorable for somebody who wants to develop a healthcare facility, but we can't really make it happen. And so ensuring that there's sufficient, commercial capacity or institutional or, sort of whatever kind of bigger type healthcare facilities might come in under, that's on the table. But what we've heard is that, they won't come because they really can't retain the workforce needed because of housing affordability. So that, and I don't want to make it all about that. The project is about more than that, but it is amazing how many things do come back to it. Because those are really some of the tools that the city has. We don't really have that many more things that we can do to incentivize a healthcare facility to come here. I think that, individual conversations between sort of people who know about these things and are involved can perhaps wield even more power than any official actions the city could take.
I guess maybe I'll ask it a slightly different way, in the sense that would you limit the number of people coming to the island if they didn't have healthcare availability? Would you say, we're not going to allow more people because we don't have healthcare, we don't have transportation, we don't have water, we don't have whatever? Is healthcare one of those things that's similar to that, to what water
No,
and
no,
sewer?
because it's about city services. So the city doesn't provide healthcare services, so that is not a limiting factor.
Got it. Okay, now we're down to 5 minutes to go in your presentation here. If there are other questions, let's keep them short and try to get them fitting in there. Any
Okay,
other final questions?
I got a couple more. And this one, I was on the Affordable Housing Task Force, and the hardest thing for us to understand was how to incentivize the actual construction of affordable units on Bainbridge. And I understand you can rezone it and you can hope that developers are attracted to it, but what if you rezone it and they aren't? What are you going to get? How is it going to happen? I don't understand. Never been able to understand, other than mandatory percentages, how this works.
Yeah, I mean, mandatory percentages are big. That's one of the most clear tools. But the other tools are partnerships, right? So working together with organizations who are doing this to try to get them here and get them building and see what the barriers are. Another tool is a levy, doing an affordable housing levy where money is sort of raised and then put towards those projects, whether that's, in concert with a private developer or, on city-owned land or not. So that's what some jurisdictions have chosen to do. But I mean, you're right, there are not that many tools in the toolbox, which is why, I'm sorry, I've used that phrase a lot. That's why getting that zoning right is really important, because we can't do it without the private market. I mean, that's been made very clear, I think, in this region over the last however many years. Governments simply do not have the resources. We don't have the finances and we don't have the land or the assets to be able to become housing providers. So it really relies on those partnerships with the community, folks who are doing affordable housing development work. If they're doing it nearby in other jurisdictions, can we kind of have conversations with them about, why don't you develop here? Can we do more to get you here? Or doing a levy or doing mandatory inclusionary zoning. Those, I don't want to say there are no other options. There certainly are others, but those are kind of the big ones.
What's your level of confidence that that can happen?
I'm sorry, had multiple, I couldn't quite hear.
Well, my question is, what's your level of confidence that that would actually work?
Which would actually work?
Well, you take all of those tools and
It would help.
and rezone, it'll help. But if I'm the state, I'm asking you to, all I'm asking you to do is to tell me what you hope you can do, right? I'm not asking you to absolutely do it. Is that part of the way the comp plan really works?
Sort of, but there is a new check-in. So in 5 years, we have to demonstrate whether what we've put out there is working. So if it hasn't worked at the 5-year point, then we have to take additional measures. And
okay, so wouldn't it be true that if you wanted to restrict that rezoning or leave it somewhat like what it's like now, and it didn't, and yet with all your other regulations and all your other zoning, you don't get the growth or the capacity that you want in 5 years, you could extend that zoning.
yes,
In other words,
in
you don't
5 years,
have to do it right now.
well, we have to demonstrate that we can meet the targets now. So
Right.
we're not able to do that without upzoning now. But if we upzone, let's say, some amount, and then in 5 years we still haven't met the targets, then we would have to upzone a further amount.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've just got a couple of minutes here, and I think you can do your last pitch on how can people make a difference? What would you like us to do, like in writing? I mean, do we send videos to people? What do we do? And why does this all matter to us as Bainbridge citizens?
Yeah, write down what's important to you and send it to us. Send it to our email addresses, send it to the public comment portal, send it to City Hall. Make sure that your priorities are kind of upfront, top of mind, listed and clear. And you can go into as much detail as you want, but we're going to be looking at every single public comment and responding, and we're going to be giving that all to the city council, and those are the decision makers here. So they need to know what the community wants to see and how the community wants to grow and develop into a place that meets all the adopted goals that this community has been working so hard on. I mean, a lot of communities don't have such amazing recent policy work to build off of that we do. So if you are passionate about the Sustainable Transportation Plan, the Climate Action Plan, the Groundwater Management Plan, you know, there are really good reasons to build on those and to use those to move forward in a way that meets everybody's, you know, visions for what this community can be. I mean, this is a really special place, and I feel like a lot of places say that, but we know that it's true for us. So I want us to be creative. You know, I don't want to see, I live here too, I don't want to see a kind of change that doesn't work for this community. But I also know that things do need to change if we want to be a place that's welcoming. And I think right now, you know, increasingly over the years, we've seen it become less welcoming, I guess, increasingly less welcome. Anyway, so you know, if folks are interested in change and in how the community can and should change to become a more welcoming place, to accommodate growth and to, you know, meet the community vision, they should get involved and tell us what that looks like for you.
Great. So show up on the 12th, the 14th, or the 18th, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of publicity about it. Thank you so much to HB Harper and to the entire planning department of the City of Bainbridge Island. Appreciate your input.
Thank you very much. It's been great to talk with you all. Really appreciate your time today.
Let's see.